So, as David said, my name is Brett Seyler. I started a company called Kerosene about a year ago, and I started it shortly after leaving Unity. I was at Unity for about 2 years, and a company called Garage Games about 2 years, or for about 3 years before that. And how many of you remember Garage Games, by the way? All right. Well, so okay. So Garage Games was sort of the Unity before Unity. It was a provider of Torque, a bunch of different game engines for 2D and 3D games, and we sold the company to a big media holding company called IAC. And one of the big initiatives that was that drove that acquisition and a lot of the work after was approaching a new model to publish games on the web. This is actually pre-Facebook API, pre-social game blow up, so it was an interesting period. And I got to get a bit of exposure to just kind of what thought went into operating games as a service, at that point. It was, fairly early, not as early as the real arcade days or a lot of people probably here at this conference, but that was my first exposure to the challenges of publishing games. And actually, my role at Unity from about 5 or 6 months in was almost entirely focused on publishing. The first form of that is really what's been talked about so far is this program called Union, and that's really tackling platforms that are kind of new to the Unity developer ecosystem. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff, particularly with a mobile focus. Unity's developer base was, very focused on iOS development and later Android development. And one of the things we started to see at Unity, even beginning like in 2010, was that after, I think this is probably, you guys are here at this conference, so free-to-play is no surprise to any of you. But we saw, this flourishing, super creative ecosystem of game developers that skewed a little on the small side in 2010, begin to sort of lose some of their position and strength on the charts, particularly in iOS. And this was due to the rise of freemium, both as a business model and the tactics associated with marketing freemium games. And so we knew we had to, at least take notice and look at how to help the developer ecosystem stay healthy and stay competitive. So again, I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and now I'm off and running with my own publishing company here. And we're a small team in San Francisco, about 5 people, very focused, all very expert. But you can imagine we pay a lot of attention to just how, we're mobile focused. We pay a lot of attention to how the mobile ecosystem evolves, how marketing tactics change, new business models around free-to-play, and all sorts of user acquisition tactics, new technology gaps to operate games as a service, all this kind of stuff. So we're living and breathing this stuff every day. The question I really want to help you guys, I guess, come to grips with here, and I guess we got 20 minutes, is this. What does a modern mobile publisher look like? What do they do? Why are they valuable? Why are they interesting? And really, hopefully, by the end, you guys have a little more info about if you're running a small or mid-sized development studio, you can understand at least some of the value prop that a modern publisher can bring. So, briefly, there's a lot of talk about sort of Publisher 2.0, and as David said, every time you have a real disruption to a platform, either a particular platform is exceptional with discovery right out of the gate, and it really changes the distribution model for games for a while. Eventually, all platforms mature, discovery gets tough, companies consolidate, and you got to spend more and more money to get noticed. The old publishers were basically, the gatekeepers, because it's very, very tough to operate an open or low barrier to entry platform. That's how all the consoles run. They want to keep the quality bar high. They have a captive audience of gamers, and they don't want to manage all that directly. So that's why a publisher model makes sense for these guys. That's why publishers exist. We could roll back to, of course, the days of being a gatekeeper to Walmart and Best Buy and Dixon's, but that's kind of rolling the clock probably too far back here. So again, anytime you've got this sort of disruption, everybody takes a brand new look at publishing. And I think if you're running a small dev studio in certainly 2009, 2010, you're focused on mobile. I probably would have said, it didn't make a lot of sense to work with a publisher. One, there weren't very many out there. The only reason might have been to look at it for connections with the platform owner. At that time, being featured by Apple was even more important than it is today. It's still important, but it was exceptionally powerful then. But yeah, again, after all this disruption, we're all taking a new hard look at what do publishers do. So, what do they do? Well, I think there are a few things. This is probably the first thing that comes to mind if you're a small team trying to publish a game on iOS or Android. Is how do you get noticed the day you go out the door? Because if you don't, it's pretty costly. If you don't, you have to pay to get users in the door. And by the way, I'm gonna assume a few things here. If you're here listening to this talk again, I'm gonna assume you understand that making a free-to-play game is advantageous. If you don't, then there's tons of talks you should go check out here. But if you're coming out of the gate and you don't have some way to build anticipation, attention with gamers for your game, and you don't get this kind of treatment from Apple or from Google, then you're really going to have to set aside some money to acquire users and to acquire the right users for your game. Sometimes that can take a long time, and it can be costly, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So this is one area where most publishers can do a really good job helping out. I'd say pretty much any of them out there that have been around for a while have developed good, strong relationships with Apple and Google. And if your game has a chance to be featured, they'll give it the best chance possible. As well as going beyond this, it's a much rarer, but beyond this, occasionally, if you've got a fantastic game that Apple really loves or Google really loves, you could be on stage at the next Apple product unveiling, or of course Google I/O or something like that. That's also really powerful attention, ends up with a lot of ripple effects in the press. It's great to get that kind of stuff if you can get it. So a publisher can help with that kind of stuff. The next piece, I think, is really important, and hopefully you guys are also absorbing this alongside all the reasons to do free-to-play here, is reasons or tools to effectively be data-driven. An analytics package that will really, really work for operating a game as a service. This is a dashboard view of Contagion, which is what we use at Kerosene for all our games. But there are a lot of great analytics tools out there. There's Swerve. You can even make Flurry work pretty well. There's all sorts of great options out there. But the real key thing is get the expertise as like a fundamental part of your development process. And publishers, if they don't, aside from offering this sort of tooling, which Contagion's not free, a lot of the tools out there aren't free, and so it's there's specialization, there's economies of scale. A publisher can offer tooling like this without the kind of cost that would typically burden or tip over a small development studio. But having tooling like this at your hands, and most importantly, the expertise, the specialist to look at it and help you come away with what are they going to be the most important insights to iterate your next rev of your game with. Super, super important. It's also a vital, most people overlook this surprisingly, but it's also a vital tool for running ad campaigns. It really, really shocks me how many people I see running user acquisition campaigns for free-to-play games, particularly on iOS, where it's very tough to do attribution for campaigns, who are just optimizing to cost per install. Which is kind of crazy because you really, who cares how much you pay if your users aren't doing what you want them to do inside your game. So there are some networks that are now helping with you can do cost per action or cost per engagement campaigns that are a little bit more helpful, but you have to instrument via their SDKs or via your own the events associated with whatever you want users to complete. And tooling like this, super, super hard to stand up yourself. I wouldn't recommend that any game studio try and build this kind of stuff for themselves. The next piece is somewhat related, and I don't even think there's actually a category of middleware for this yet, or just a good description of what this kind of stuff is, but let me just describe what it does. So we couldn't really find anything out there to give us the means to dynamically iterate both what stuff cost inside our game, the amount of currency we grant, soft currency or premium currency. Also, just like the merchandising order inside the store, and all sorts of little game levers and variables like how much loot is dropped at this battle, or what enemies spawn here, and how much health do they have. All these little levers, if you can have a server-side interface to manage your game from after it goes live, can be incredibly valuable, because especially on iOS, your turnaround time's 2 to 3 weeks or more these days. So what we did is we just built a pretty simple server-side, we call it sometimes like a CMS ourselves, just like you'd have for a website, where we can go and we can look at global changes to balance the game better, or to test merchandising that we think will work better. These are deep changes inside the game, by the way. They're not just like throwing up an interstitial window and saying, here's an offer, that we just, is loaded from a web page, or is just an image. These are changes like, okay, you just beat chapter 1. What is the first upgrade that unlocks and prompts you to spend more currency? So most publishers out there, if they haven't built stuff like this for themselves yet, are in the middle of doing it. And it's really, and a lot of game developers too, it's not rocket science, but it's just a bit orthogonal to the usual creative process of building a fun game. But it's really, really valuable and vital if you're going to operate games as a service. So I think what we're going to see is new sort of tech and middleware pop up to serve exactly this need. Maybe it'll come from the engine providers like Unity, or more from the ad networks. But regardless, I think this kind of stuff is really, really important. And so if you're not building it, again, I would ask, if you're talking to a publisher or considering what a publisher can do for you, most of them will at least have the expertise to instrument your game to make these kind of changes live. And that can just, the turnaround time while your user base is active, especially if your retention numbers aren't great right out of the gate, that can be a really, really valuable piece of tooling to have. The next piece that a publisher can probably provide, I think is super important, is social infrastructure. So at Kerosene, we licensed some technology to stand this stuff up from a company called Gorilla Graph. It's white label tech, but we skinned it, as you can see, to look like Kerosene. It serves a function that's been around for a long, long time, since the days of Xbox Live, and of course Steam has this. But it's leaderboards, it's accounts, it's achievements, and all the random stuff you can extend to from there. So I think this stuff is really, really critical. The big reason why is user acquisition costs are high, and they're already really going up fast. What this does is this establishes a direct means to communicate with your players, even after they've stopped playing your game. And it does it, this system does it through, I think, the most evergreen communication channel possible. That's email. So if you haven't built at least some form of this kind of stuff for your games, and if you're not using OpenFaint's gone now, there aren't very many options for this kind of stuff. Most times a publisher will have a system like this of their own. And you as developers, if you're looking at speaking with a publisher about what sort of important business terms are associated with partnering up, you should be thinking too, like, okay, you've basically driven a whole bunch of users into their network. If they're trying to build a network of users to market to over time, you should ask, what sort of ongoing rights will you have to market your games to those users if the partnership is for one game only? The next piece, this is just sort of an example of this, but like a lot of creative in games goes untested prior to launch that can actually have a big impact on your game's success. Most people are evaluating games these days on just an icon, or an icon and maybe one screenshot. It makes a lot of sense to spend a little bit of time and extra energy on a bunch of creative iteration for things like an icon, and spend some money with AdMob or any network where you can actually test the click-through rates for this sort of thing, especially if you can do targeted tests by audience. So we did, these are a section of the icons that we did for Bladeslinger prior to launch. We did some campaigns on Facebook and on Reddit, and a bunch of other ad networks, mobile stuff on AdMob, and found that the click-through rates for these there was actually quite a big variance. And it didn't, actually, what the best click-through rate was this one, second from the left bottom, which I think is the boringest looking one. This is the one I like the least, but it had the best click-through rate. We found another, that top left one, that had a similar click-through rate, and everybody liked it a little better, so that's what we ended up going with. But really important to test this kind of stuff, again, especially if you're aiming for not, everybody is your audience for something like, an Angry Birds style game, but if you're actually aiming for a niche, test your creative with that niche. That's really important. And any publisher worth their salt will have people that will run you through this and help you with this. The next piece, this is really, really important. I would say this is one of the top 3 pillars of any publisher. It's just user acquisition. And again, this assumes you're doing free-to-play. User acquisition for a paid game is very, very tough. Yeah, you have to get creative. It can be done, but it's very, very hard to do in an ROI positive way. But having a team that knows what to ask ad networks for in terms of just literally negotiating with them for bids on a given day, or just knowing how their bidding system works to bid smartly against the other traffic in their system, it can save you big percentages on your overall CPI costs. And on top of that, just tracking your campaigns. This ties back into the importance of analytics. Tracking your campaigns with independent tooling so that you know, okay, I'm getting higher quality users from this network than this network, or with this campaign inside this network than this campaign inside the same network. That stuff's really important to test. Having a team and at least some tech to operate that kind of service is super important. You can delegate it to guys like Fixu and MoPub. The model that they typically use is, I don't think it's great for aligning interests, but it's like they take 20% of your ad budget and then spend the rest smartly as they can. The smartly as they can thing, I think, is a little tricky again, because you've got to set up really clear goals, not just let them optimize to lowest cost per install. That's often not the smartest spend of your ad dollars. So most publishers will solve this for you and have a lot of expertise and experience and tooling to back it up. The next piece is, everybody knows this is important. I actually think it's more important for mobile than ever before. I think especially on iOS, the discovery problem is, I think, it's worse than ever. The iOS 6 stuff creates a more top-heavy ecosystem than probably any prior generation of the App Store. So getting press, connecting with wherever you can find mobile gamer communities that you think would like your game is really, really important. No one of these will move the needle and blow your game up, but getting people talking about your game on a regular basis can really help. And having some relationship with journalists and having a good contact list when you're going to announce stuff, send out assets, announce a trailer, all that kind of stuff is really, really valuable. So most publishers will solve that for you as well. The last piece, I think this is the trickiest, but potentially the most valuable. It's just hard to test unless you go and ask a studio that's worked with a publisher in the past. It's the production and design consultation you'll get with working with just experts in the space, experts on free-to-play, experts on the platform, experts building for a particular audience. Those pieces are really tough to nail. And as a game developer, you don't get you're doing it in serial. Each game takes probably 6 months plus, more like a year on average. You don't get a lot of tests of this. A publisher sees far more tests over time of what works and what doesn't work, and they're not always as deep in it as you will be to making games, but working with the right people can be incredibly valuable. So I think this is one of those where if you're talking to a publisher for help on this, just do your homework. Just make sure you talk with some of the developers that have worked with this publisher in the past and understand if their goals were the same as your goals. The last piece, of course, publishers sometimes have money and sometimes will pay you to help get your game out the door and get it completed. I think the money for getting mobile games out the door is drier and drier. There's just a lot of consolidation, and touch on this on the next slide. But working with third parties under the games as a service model is incredibly tough. And a lot of publishers that were out there trying to make that work have basically given up on that and decided they're just going to insource all their development. It's in some ways it's a lot easier. It takes a lot of trust to pull off really true, like, arm's length third-party developers with publishers and make it work. So if you're looking at what's out there, these are kind of the guys that have been out there for a while. I think doing really good work. Chilingo's, I'm sure that probably at least for indies, the most well-known in the mobile space. What you guys may not know is that these guys operate under quite different publishing models. Gree and DNA are pretty famous for, they have this well-developed platform with social infrastructure, and they do user acquisition very well. They have deep pockets. Everything I've talked about, they basically at least know how to do and can do with third parties. Glue, I would put in the same category. They don't have quite every piece, but at the time when they were doing third-party publishing, they were doing a pretty good job for it. They were asking a lot as well, but and these guys, I think Chilingo has some tech that's helpful, but primarily they do a good job with production and design. I think that they have great relationship with Apple. They do a good job with most of the pieces, but they're not quite as of a full tech offering as these guys on the left. So one thing I wanted to just share with you guys too is, again, I mentioned that a lot of these companies have begun to shut down their third-party publishing offerings. Gree, I don't know this to be 100% true yet, but I've heard from a lot of developers now that they've basically given up on this. They're doing either first or second-party stuff, meaning they own the IP. So if you want to make your own products that might not be viable, or at least maybe not viable for much longer, and Glue shut down their third-party platform, I think it was about a year ago now. They may open it up again. I think I saw a piece of news that they're looking at doing at least partnerships via UA, user acquisition, so that might get interesting again. But basically, what I would suggest you guys take away from this is that it is, these guys have tried it. They've tried it with a really good offering and great teams behind it, and it's tough to work with third parties. It requires a lot of trust, and a trust from you guys as well if you're looking at these. New entrants, Activision's doing publishing in partnership with Flurry now. Pocket Gems is at least talking about doing some stuff. I don't know if they've shipped a third-party game yet. Kabam, again, is I think they've published a few third-party games now, and I would say all these companies, Kerosene here as well, basically newcomers. There are a few others. There are a lot of companies talking about publishing, but real full-fledged efforts trying to hit all these pieces. I think these are the main companies that I've seen enter, and they look like they should be able to do everything really well. Kabam certainly knows they've had great success with their own games on iOS and Android. Same with Pocket Gems. Activision's a little newer, but I think Flurry's got some really good people to help with a lot of the pieces that are important. So I think probably if you guys came to this talk, most of you came wondering if you should work with a publisher or not, whether you should entertain it, whether it made sense for your studio, for your team. I'm not sure how to help you guys make that decision entirely. It's going to be tricky. You're going to have to do your own biz dev and really just consider what kind of game you really want to take a swing at making. But I did make a list. So I would say don't talk to a publisher if you've got the resources to pull this off internally. And it actually doesn't take a giant team. Again, like Kerosene's, a small handful of people in San Francisco. We're all expert. We all hustle like mad to cover the bases. But it can be done, with a small team if you have it internally as well, especially if you used a lot of licensed tech the way we're doing it. I would say, again, this is really, really important. This is particularly important if you don't have a really well-known IP for your game, or if you're not doing something sort of on the at least visual quality level of like a blade slinger, where you're at least going to get some attention for looking pretty out of the gate. But most of the time, you're going to need to set quite a bit of money aside just to make sure you can test your economy once the game's out and live. And what I tell most independent developers is about $250K is what you need to feel safe. And that's quite a bit. That's more than a lot of game budgets. When we go out with free-to-play games and we're testing the economy to make sure it works, and we're sort of thinking, okay, well, what happens if we don't get a lot of pickup from press, or we don't get featured by Apple, and we're just going to have to sort of brute force this? The number's usually like 100 to 200K. That's spending it smartly too. The last thing I would say is, like, again, if you're comfortable solving these tech challenges on your own, or licensing them and sort of stitching them together in a functional way, I think they are much greater than the sum of their parts. Just having an analytics system is not that powerful unless you also have like a lot of great ways to use it and extend it. One of the ways is really effective user acquisition. Another way is just like, especially you need more tooling for this, but if you have really good live ops tooling, then you can get insights really quick and make changes really quick. That stuff's really important. But I would say if you're a team, on the order of 30, 40 people, you can afford to set people aside to do this. You have the funds to license tech in. You probably don't need to work with a publisher. And you may still find reasons to do it on project to project. I imagine the only reasons would probably be if you're making the transition as a studio to learning and understanding free-to-play design. Then it can be valuable, I would say, to partner with a publisher at least once to really get some coaching and gain some expertise, internalize some expertise on that. But for the most part, if you're sort of this profile of a studio, you should go at your own. And I think you can do a good job. All right. Any questions, guys?
I think that may be the first time that a founder of a publishing company has ever stood on stage and said, you probably don't need a publisher if you can do these three things. And I think that just goes to illustrate the change in the power dynamic right at the moment between developers and publishers, predominantly driven by this free-to-play game mechanic, right? This games as a service has just changed the power structure in a way that is, I think a lot of publishers are struggling to understand.
Yeah, I think it's more transparent. It's less black box than it was, obviously, in the days of retail, or even when it's just like the gatekeeper model. Now it's tech, it's specialization, it's economies of scale.
So who in here is actually developing a game? And who in here would never consider working with a publisher? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us why? Hang on, let me give you I want this to be on the tape, so. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Björn from Arctic Mill. We've had a couple of games, and we have released them, and they're done fairly successful, but we still want to have more people playing our games, so that's why we're trying to find more about how to use a publisher, basically. Yeah.
So you would consider working with a publisher?
I would, yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. I want to talk to you.
Okay, sorry. That's okay.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. When do you think it's worth having a publisher during the development? When is the good time to have on the team?
When is the best time along your game development cycle?
Yeah, from the beginning, concession, and.
I would say it depends on what you're looking for from a publisher. If you're looking for free-to-play design consultation, then the earlier the better. I wouldn't say beyond like having a firm idea of like concept and IP development, or at least like being able to show the publisher that you have some chops there, so they know that it's worthwhile to engage really early. It's tough. I mean, the kind of work that our team does with studios that we are able to engage with really early, it's really deep. It's basically like we're a part of their game dev studio, and you can only do that if you have a ton of trust with the studio. It's got to go both ways, but I would say if you are looking for that kind of thing, like if your studio is making the transition to free to play, or even if you're just going to mobile and trying to understand the different usage patterns for mobile devices versus the browser or consoles, a publisher can help you a lot. You can just be super studious as a studio and probably learn a lot. I don't know if you can learn enough, but a lot of studios get there on their own too. But I would say if you want that, earlier the better. If you're just looking for like UA, and I mean there are a lot of publishers, or they're kind of saying they're publishers that are really just doing UA. doing a really good job with UA. Like they have a, Kabam, for example, has a ton of users. They probably don't have enough games for the users in their network, and they'd like to send those games or send those users into games where they'll probably spend more money and Kabam can get a cut. If you've got a game that has really good metrics already and you're just looking for help on the UA front, that can be an interesting route to go as well.
I think we have one more.
Okay.
Hey, Brett.
Hey.
Richard Firminger, GM of Flurry.
Howdy.
Good presentation, loved it.
Thank you.
I'm going to forgive you for saying that you can even make Flurry work.
Well, I've used Flurry a lot. It's come a long way. I mean, I first used Flurry, I think it was late 2011, and it didn't have a lot of stuff that you guys have now. It's come a long way. It's
cool. 90,000 companies are going to agree with you. So, question is, you mentioned around, I totally obviously agree, I'm going to on the use of data and the science around that and being smarter at using analytics. Have you had much experience in the sort of new emergence of specific third-party channel trackers like HasOffers or AdX or AdTruth? Have you had any, because they're designed to do exactly what you're describing, which is to understand the relative merits and value of each of your sources of traffic against some kind of key metric. Flurry does have its own product, but we won't go into that.
Right,
have you had any experience in looking at those technologies?
Yeah, you guys launched a campaign tracker recently as well,
User
right?
acquisition.
Sorry, whatever.
User acquisition analytics. It's a mouthful. Peter Farraga needs to work on that brand.
Yeah, I think it's particularly valuable to have that, to solve that problem in a way that's easy to or already stitched to your analytics system. So Flurry solving this gap for developers, I think is, welcome, pain point to knock out. So companies that are sort of more specifically tackling just that, like HasOffers, I don't think they unlock the potential that can be there in doing just super cost-effective and ROI positive user acquisition, because they can't see deep enough inside what's happening in your game like an analytics system can. So you either have to stitch them together somehow, and that can be tricky and cumbersome, or again, like find a solution that's already partnered up that way or offered by the same partner.
Thank you very much, Brett.
Bet.
So we have